Hi, Bree.
Hi, Lisa.
It's such an honor to be sitting here with you, having this conversation. So, thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for asking me to be on your podcast. I appreciate the chance to share maybe some of my stories and some of my experiences. And if it can help people or if they're interesting, yeah, this will be fun.
Awesome. Well, I know that you just arrived back from a Joe Dispenza retreat. And of
hmm
course, I want to know about that. But
hmm
first, I'd love to know how you landed in this moment working with Joe and your journey to becoming a medicine woman. And maybe there was a moment in time, kind of a defining moment for you, or perhaps there was several. So
hmm
you can determine which one that will be.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, it's interesting because yeah, you emailed me some questions beforehand and it's like, what does your healing journey look like? And it's like, oh, sweet Jesus, like it's been wild. And then it's sometimes even the realization I didn't even realize I was on a healing journey.
Mm,
And then all of a sudden arriving at a point where it's like, oh, there's been a lot going on. And so I've been blessed with a very interesting life. And it's funny how I guess it sort of started, growing up like being like the weird kid and not really fitting in. And just I always had this sort of underlying anxiety and it was the 80s. There was a lot of bullying in schools going on. Adults were allowed to openly comment about your weight. Well-meaning relatives would say things and so just realizing that maybe I've only started to realize I internalized a lot of that stuff and
mm,
never quite felt right with who I was. And I even remember kind of reinventing identity for myself when I was around 10. And
mm,
I put myself on a diet when I was 10 and an exercise program. And I made myself into like this tough tomboy where like no one could, the rough exterior. And at the time, it of course helped me in some ways, but there's a lot of that vulnerability and walls to put up. But so I kind of experimented with that for a bit, but then when I was in junior high, I joined the wrestling team at my school.
mm,
And that was huge for me. It was actually the first year that they allowed girls on the wrestling team at the school. And so that was a new experience for the coaches, for the boys on the team, for everyone. But for me, I really fell in love with wrestling. And it felt like home. It really did. And it gave me skills to set goals, to work hard. And I just really enjoyed the feeling of being on the mat. And
mm,
I really was able to find a place for myself in that with friends and an identity, which was both good and bad. And it's been interesting because I've been toying with the idea or thinking a lot about the idea lately of like, when does your medicine turn to poison? And at what
mm.
point is it good and what point is it bad? And the teacher that I work with in the Amazon, he talks about holding things. And he's like, you hold them gently. He's like, you never want to squeeze the shit out of them. And, and so kind of looking back on when did I hold things gently and when did I squeeze the
Mm,
shit out of them? And I can be a very intense person. And so knowing where that line was, but I definitely like wrestling kind of gave me a great intro into spirituality, which is
mm,
kind of a maybe a funny thing, but not. I had a junior high wrestling coach who was quite good. He had competed at the university level and he would talk to us every day about the power of the mind, like after every practice, and talk about, we weren't allowed to say I can't or I'm tired of practice. And he, talked about visualization and all these things were new to me. And I really like wholeheartedly implemented them. And I could see my life changing both like inside me and outside of me because of that. Another cool thing that I started experiencing when I was wrestling, and maybe a lot of athletes can speak to this. I know wrestlers can speak to it, but not a lot of people talk about it, is kind of entering that flow state where, you know, you're in a wrestling match and you're fighting someone, and all your focus has to be in the moment and hitting that spot where every action you do is the right action. Every like time, there's a weird time dilation that goes on. You're not really thinking, your body's thinking, and it's this beautiful thing. And once I started training at the university with their junior team and started wrestling more seriously, I started experiencing these flow states more often. And I was like, oh, what are these? Like, I want more of these. This is great. And so I like wrestling was my obsession, my refuge. It was an interesting time to be a female wrestler because it was kind of new. And so there were things, you know, a lot of the time I would very much deny my feminine nature because it's like, well, I wanted to train with the boys and I wanted to be like to be accepted and to fit in. So once more, okay, no makeup, no dresses, like nothing, like really fit in kind of thing. But you know, there were a lot of great rewards that went along with it. I made my first junior national team when I was 17.
Wow.
And I got to go to compete at the World Championships, Junior World Championships in Norway, which was amazing. And then the next year I made the junior and the senior team. So I got to go to Romania. I got to go to, where was the senior? Oh, the senior worlds that year was in Sweden. So I slowly started to get to, you know, travel the world and have all these great experiences. And so that went well for a while, but you know, and like I kind of touched on earlier, at what point in time does your medicine become your poison? And there was a fine line between feeling good and feeling accomplished and celebrating myself as an athlete, but then needing that external validation. And the two kind of came along with one and the same, really.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of athletes will kind of attest to that, where it's tough to separate the two. And then especially when you get to a high enough level and your funding relies on your success and your own feelings of yourself kind of depend on whether you're successful or not, and that's tough because it's like, how do you experience a failure and motivate yourself to improve but still love yourself? And I think that's where maybe a lot of athletes have that disconnect, where it's like, can I experience failure and still love myself and still find the motivation? And like the thing about wrestling, it's a brutal sport. And it's grueling. And like there's sometimes I look back at the training I did and I'm like, what were you running from inside yourself that you had to put yourself through this? Like, what were you, because, you know, with wrestling, I gained all these amazing skills, but at the same time, you know, looking back on it, there was also probably things inside me that I didn't want to face. So keeping myself so intensely focused on wrestling helped me avoid the stuff that I wasn't comfortable looking at inside myself.
And so many of us do that. I mean,
Yeah.
I can relate, as I'm sure many of the people listening as well, whether it be work, sports, addictions, whatever we throw ourselves into, like you said before, what point does it become the poison? At what point? And only you can know that for yourself.
Yeah, there's no hard or fast rule, or it's not like there's a big buzzer that goes off where it's like, okay, you've crossed the point where this isn't healthy anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's
ding, 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 or you get like a smack across the head or something. Stop that.
Yeah. So, and it was interesting too, because I grew up like going to church, like fairly religious. And, you know, I loved it, but I also wasn't comfortable with it too. There were some very beautiful things about it, but there were things that didn't quite sit right in the logical mind of, okay, a loving God, but you know, those things. And so, you know, by the time I hit university, I was struggling with it, but you know, really trying to push it down and not to think too hard about it. And I always say my gateway drug kind of into spirituality was Joseph Campbell. And anyone who is friends with me or is good friends, I've given me a book or something, a Joseph Campbell book. But I remember being in university class one day, and they played a clip of his interview with Bill Moyers, and I remember being like, whoa, and it that was a huge paradigm shift for me, where listening to him talk about, you can keep the symbol, you can keep the myth, and it's still important, but there's also like this freeing aspect to it of knowing that, okay, but there's more. And so it was kind of like the intersection of that, where that was sort of my first real paradigm shift and I remember the day that I saw the clip, and I kind of went AWOL for the rest of the day, because I went to bookstores and I'm like, I have to find out more about this. So it was like that deeper calling of, hey, like, you can keep your symbols, but just know that the symbols aren't it. There's something more beyond this. And so that was really quite helpful for me.
That pursuit of hearing something, finding a key, whether that be through a voice or a person or reading a book, and then just finding yourself obsessed.
Totally.
I got to know more. I got to do research. I have to listen to everything that this person has to say. And that right there, that searching and that seeking and having our minds and our worlds kind of blown wide open by new teachings is by far one of my favorite things. You know, this element of, wow, because there's something, I think for me anyway, there's something that gets unlocked each time that happens, and something that wants to be shown that maybe, you know, I hadn't had the time for,
right.
or didn't make the time for, but it was already present within me somewhere, or searching.
Wasn't ready until wasn't that
ready
moment,
yet.
and then it just comes in, and it's like, aha, this is it. Yeah. And so I continued wrestling throughout university, and at that point in time, I think my need for sort of external validation and for proving my worth, you know, it all kind of culminated into the poison. And it was the summer of 2006, and I had made the world team, and I was finishing up a master's, and I was getting married. So there were all these things, and you know, I was preparing for the world championship. It's in Guangzhou, China. And I remember my coach being like, okay, like, this might be your podium performance at a world championships. And I was like, okay. And I go, and I came dead last at the world championships that year. And then I was supposed to finish up my master's that summer and start a PhD in the fall. Didn't finish up my master's, and ended up getting married. But like, by the time all the house of cards crumbled, I was like, well, screw this, I'm done, I'm burnt out. And I managed to pull myself together for the Olympic trials in 2007, but my heart wasn't in it. And I retired from wrestling and decided not to do a PhD, and went and worked downtown, oil and gas, Calgary. And that didn't feel right either, at all. but at that point in time, I'm like, I don't know what to do. And so I ended up, I had my 2 kids, and was a stay-at-home mom. And that was an interesting initiation too. And I really think motherhood is one of the most intense initiations that can happen. And I really do believe it can be a spiritual awakening. And I think it is for a lot of women.
Absolutely.
And depending on if it's recognized or not, it can be a blessing or it can be a really hard time.
Yeah.
And it can be both at the same time. And for me, after my second child, I went into the most crippling depression that I had ever experienced. And I was afraid to ask for help. You know, there's well-meaning relatives who they'll say things about your parenting style, maybe. And so you're afraid to ask for help because it's like, well, I can't look like a bad mom.
That's right.
And asking for help also maybe implies that oh, I don't love my kids. So it's like, okay, I can't ask for help because I adore these kids, but I feel like killing myself every day.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to do. And that was, I guess, by far like the most loneliest time in my life. And I was really struggling. And once more, I think coupled that with the retirement from a sport, you retire from something when you're 28. and this is the same thing. All of a sudden, that thing that maybe you've been avoiding looking at in yourself, you're looking at it. So there was all those things, and it was a time. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many endings and so many beginnings. And as you were speaking to stepping into that role of mother, so often a lot of our unfinished business, once we go through that birth portal, comes up.
Oh yeah.
In a big way. I'm happy and thankful that we're speaking to this now because it is actually quite normal, especially in our society, for folks to go through that postpartum depression.
Oh, yeah.
I don't have any living children, but after I miscarried, there was the feeling of being empty and not knowing what to do, and a deep depression happened after that. So it's just important, I think, to speak more to that because we feel like we have to have our shit all together. When you getting back on the saddle, when you doing things again, and you're just like drowning and drowning.
And you know, parenting advice from experts and from books and psychologists, it changes. And then
that's right,
the parenting advice from, say, a mother or a grandmother or an aunt, they parent differently. And so
that's right,
deciding on what you need to do is great, but then sometimes there's not a lot of support for that. And so you know, sometimes there's the backhanded comment and it's like, oh, well, you're still breastfeeding. And it's like, yeah, and I'm just trying not to kill myself right now. So my kids are loved and safe. So let's just tell me I'm doing a good job.
That's
and
right.
More,
give me a hug, damn it.
Yeah.
Pat on the back.
and the same thing, like once more, if like at the time I was still struggling with issues of self-worth, self-love. And so being unable to give that to myself, receiving those criticisms, it's like, yeah, you're doing terrible. Like, and it wasn't easy, you know?
Yeah. Well, especially during those times, we tend to, because there's negativity bias. So we tend to get even more so when we're struggling or when our hormones are raging or when we're going through major transitions. And then someone will come in, like you said, well-meaning relatives that we love and we know they love us, and they'll just say something and it'll be the thing that we hold on to. I suck. You know, I'm not good enough. I'm not being a good mother. And all of these things just start clouding, even, you know, making us feel worse than we already do.
Totally.
Yeah. How long did that last for, if you don't mind me asking?
I remember because I got to the point, because I am not someone who likes taking medication, and I got to the point where it came down to, okay, I have to do something, or I have to go see a doctor or something. And so I kind of sat and I was like, okay, like in your heart of hearts, if you could pick one thing to do that could make, like, when was the last time you were really happy? And it's like, well, when I was on the national team traveling around the world and wrestling with my friends. And it's like, okay, well, like, you're 32 and you just had two kids. Is that feasible? And so it was funny because I actually went on a like an internet search, and I remember searching the internet for like the famous world champions in wrestling, and like what age they were when they were retired, and at that, and most of them were men. And I'm looking them up, and it's like, okay, he retired at 24, he retired at 26, and I'm like, crap. And then I looked up Dave Schultz, who his career ended at age 36, and he was a multiple time world champ. I'm like, okay, if I'm gonna do this, like Dave Schultz is my power animal. I'm gonna
You're like, he my guy.
He's my guy, right? And actually so I started training again, which wasn't easy.
Yeah.
And like for the first 6 months, I was just my body, like wrestling is a very core intensive sport. So I was just trying not to like wet my pants when I was training.
Like, how can I not pee right now?
Basically, that's what it was. And I remember my first Canadian championship back after having kids, like my daughter was still breastfeeding. And I ended up coming third, and I got randomly selected for doping control. And so I step off the mat after my first place match, and my boobs are big and leaking because I haven't seen my daughter all day.
That's right.
And like person with the clipboard comes up to me and they're like, "Hey, you've been selected for doping." And I'm like, right. And I remember my body was still doughy from being pregnant, and I just said, "Do I look like I'm on drugs?" and they said, well, either way, you'll have to come with it. Okay, that's fine. And actually, and the funny thing was, sort of full circle, is the first international tournament that I wrestled after coming back was the Dave Schultz Memorial Tournament. So that was kind of that full circle moment where it's like, okay, my inspiration for coming back to wrestling at a later age. Yeah. I wrestled, that is true. That was the first one. And so, but once again, the same thing. Wrestling started off as the medicine, and it was beautiful. And I made the national team again eventually. I got to compete at the World Championships in Las Vegas in 2015 in front of my kids, in front of my family. It was great. And the 2016 Olympics, I came close to making the team, but I didn't. But I was selected as a training partner. And so I got to go down to Rio, and my friend Erica Wiebe, who I was her training partner, she ended up winning the Olympics. And so my kids were down there, and my husband at the time. And so my kids, they got to see someone they know win an Olympic gold medal, and we would have all these crazy experiences. And the interesting thing about being a training partner at the Olympics, it's like you got to wear every single hat. Like if you're there to try and make the wrestlers who are competing the experience feel normal as possible, so that they can have their best experience. So, laughing, joking around, being their friend, being their training partner. But then if they need something, if the coaches need something, hey, can you go find some coconut milk?
That's right.
Sure. I'm in Rio de Janeiro.
Around. Yeah.
We'll go find it, but it was a beautiful experience. And afterwards, we had my husband at the time and I had decided to travel with the kids around South America. And I had traveled through Peru when I was 21, and I loved the country. It was beautiful. And I said, okay, we got to take the kids there. And when I was 21, we had heard about, my friend and I, when we were traveling through the jungle, we'd heard about ayahuasca. And I'll say this disclaimer first. It's like, I don't drink. I've never drank anything. I've never smoked pot. Like, I'm a very clean living person, but for some reason back then I was like, yeah, like, that sounds great. And my friend at the time, she's like, no, we're not doing that. and so I, for some reason, it's like, I've never done anything in my life, but let's start off with the most potent psychedelic on the planet.
That's right. Let's go.
And so after the Olympics, when we were traveling around, I was like, you know what, if we're going to go to the jungle again, I would like to experience this medicine for sure. And like as a disclaimer, like it's 100% a medicine. Like I don't know anyone who would use it recreationally because it can be quite a severe teacher. It can be a gentle teacher sometimes. But and just at the time I didn't know, so I was like, this place looks great, right? But if anyone is thinking of it, I would say do your research, find someone safe, find someone that you know other people have sat with.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
that being said, so after the Olympics, when we were traveling around, I went to the jungle in Peru and I did 2 ayahuasca ceremonies, and they were beautiful and difficult. And I felt like I benefited quite a bit from them.
For those of you wishing to dive into the world of somatic healing and get a taste of what it's like to discover the wisdom of your body, I'm offering $100 off my signature course, Reclaiming Resilience, to the listeners of this episode. It is a self-paced 5-week course that teaches you how to be with big emotions and sensations. It expands your capacity for more joy, more love, and more pleasure, while you also learn how to access your boundaries, intuition, and build safety within your body. Essentially, you'll be learning how to harness the power of your nervous system and welcome in more clarity, authentic communication, and fulfilling relationships. In the program, we are changing the way that we perceive ourselves, our patterns, and our limiting beliefs, as well as finding our unique voice. Use the code, all caps, feel good at checkout. And for those of you who are seeking one-on-one support, I also offer coaching and therapy packages and one-on-one sessions. I'll pop all of that information in the show notes. And now let's get back to the show. Can I ask you, just to interject, during that time, were you still feeling that depression, or was there still, because you had mentioned?
Well, and it's interesting because there were underlying rumblings of it.
Yeah.
And when I first started back wrestling,
yeah,
it allowed me to put my focus on wrestling and again away from that depression. But as my wrestling career drew to an end, and I knew it was going to end, and I was 35 when I was the training partner at the Olympics, and I knew that, you only got a few more years left of wrestling because I could already feel my body was falling apart.
Yeah.
And so it was starting to bubble up again. And, my marriage wasn't awful, but it wasn't working.
Yeah.
And then I'll say this too. I started thinking about what do I want to do after I'm done wrestling? Like I need a smoother landing this time when I retire, because last time just leaving didn't work.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting and asking Source, God, the divine, I said, I'm really grateful for my life. And I've had so many amazing experiences up until this point in time. I would like to spend the rest of my life helping people. And I have this saying where I say wishes come true, not free. Because the universe will give you exactly it'll give you exactly what you ask for, but it will rearrange your life really good to make sure that happens.
That's right.
Yeah. And so yeah, when I started wrestling again, it took away the feelings of depression, anxiety, things like that. But once more, I think it was because they were always there. And I just wasn't facing them. So once more, I started wrestling and I was able to move my attention somewhere else. But as my career drew to an end, things really started falling apart. And I feel like the universe will send you, or you send yourself. It's debatable, one and the same, right?
Yeah.
Like when things need to change, or when you really need to look at something, at first you get like a feather, like,
that's right.
Hey, something's kind of wrong.
Yeah.
And then if you ignore it, you get a brick. And then if you ignore it, like a freight train will come, and you'll have no choice but to change.
Yeah.
like is really, yeah.
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 Yeah. It would be nice if we didn't need the freight train. But
If you learn how
alas,
to
sometimes we
listen,
do.
yeah. If you learn how to listen, you
That's
can
right.
usually catch it before the freight train, but
Yeah.
sometimes you need a freight train.
Yeah.
Hmm. And so I like around the end of the at the end of the Olympics 2016, I would say I was in between brick and freight train
Mm-hmm.
and ignoring the brick. So, yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
I just want to say something because it's, I think, important to just put a marker in this. You said when you were seeking, you're like, when was the last time I was happy? You know, and you were in this depressed, immobile state, we'll call it, because from a somatic perspective, that's depression. You're like, you
Hmm.
don't want to move, you don't want to do these
Yeah.
things. And it's really hard. The body feels really sluggish. And so it's like, oh, happiness. Yes, I want to move my body.
Hmm.
I need to go and be physically active. So it's so beautiful that we get these messages, but doing so without the awareness of the emotion that's still there
Yeah.
behind is when
Hmm.
we get into, okay, well, that helped for the short term. Now I have to address this other piece.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we already carry such intelligence. We know moving our physical bodies, well, it doesn't have to be wrestling,
Yeah.
it could be whatever we enjoy doing. For me, it's dancing in my kitchen,
Hmm.
or sometimes it's going in my car and screaming at the top of my lungs, or whatever whatever that looks like, to move this energy that wants to be in motion. So
Yes.
I just wanted
Totally.
to put that
Yeah.
marker in there because I just think it's brilliant how we mostly know, but there can be pieces that are still not apparent to us.
Totally. And
Yeah.
like even I credit wrestling, especially for the second time, my second career, for really bringing me back to life, because I
Yeah.
remember like being in that a dead space, and
Aliveness.
I
Yeah.
wasn't listening to music, and I was
That's
just
right.
going through the motions, and I was
Mm-hmm.
crying all the time.
Yeah.
And I started going to practices, and it's like, oh, okay. And then I started listening to music again, and then I started
Mm-hmm.
remembering things that I liked and things that I enjoyed. And it
Yes,
was that little
exactly.
spark of it helped me get myself back.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for all that. So
Hmm.
you were about to go into the next phase
The
of
next, oh, so the
the
next phase was
medicine.
my
Yeah.
life completely just crumbling.
Okay.
And watching it crumble with like horror and at the same time good humor, and just being like, okay.
Here we go. Yeah.
And really the next phase was addressing my marriage. And
Mm,
I was married to an amazing man, a kind man, but it wasn't working.
yeah.
And same thing, ironically, one of the most lonely times in my life was when I was married.
Yeah.
And I think some people experience that, and it's not expected, and then you're there. And then the whole addressing, well, I mean, if I do leave, I'm agreeing to seeing my children half the amount of time that I
That's
see
right.
them, and financially crippling my family.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of things where it's like, well, I think maybe I can just tough this out. And
Yeah.
that only lasts for so long, toughing it out.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, too, I had been sitting in more ayahuasca ceremonies, and I had found the teacher that I work with now. I had sat with a few people, not all of them great. Once more, I'm going to reiterate, figure
Mm-hmm.
out who's good to sit with
Yeah.
if you're going to go do this medicine. But, I'd go down to Peru, and I would work with my maestro, and the medicine, you can't hide from it. And you, if you will be shown your authentic self. And if you keep denying that authentic self, it's pretty rough. And sitting in ceremonies are pretty rough. And, you can't go from ceremony to ceremony without doing the work in your life.
That's right.
And, I came to realize that I need to address my marriage and this marriage isn't right for me and I'm not happy in it. And that was tough because I like to think I'm a person of my word. And so unwrapping that, where it's like, I said I would be married to this person for the rest of my life. And now I have to go against that. And then also to a good person, to a kind person, you know, it somehow feels like you'd be more validated if, okay, well, this person's cheating on me or they're abusive.
Yeah, you almost want there to be something majorly wrong.
Right?
But there was just, it was
There
in a
was.
different
Well,
way.
and there
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
but I remember, you know, I was the one who brought up the subject of divorce. And you know, of course, we talked about it lots and we danced around it. And then at one point in time, he came to me and he said, I think I might be gay. And I was like, oh, well, okay, well, you need to figure that out then. And so doing all this, this was like in the last part of my wrestling career, and I was barely keeping it together.
Yeah.
And because I wanted to be supportive of this person who was my husband at the time, and even though we weren't good married to each other, I was the only person at the time who he was talking to about that. And I didn't feel like I could tell anyone about it because that would be a betrayal of his confidence.
That's right.
But it was difficult.
Yeah.
And having two kids and trying to keep the kids' lives as normal as possible while their mom's off competing around the world, while their dad is figuring out his sexuality and the marriage is falling apart. And, you know, then for me at that time too, it's like, okay, and then what are you going to do after you're done wrestling? Because you haven't worked as a geologist. My degrees were in geology for so long that you're not going to be hired as a geologist. So what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And so there was a lot going on, and it felt like I was in the middle of a whirlwind. And, you know, eventually, well, it was interesting too, because then also my husband at the time and we talked about, well, do we keep the marriage as a structure? And then just kind of go and take care of our own needs outside of the marriage? Or do we completely dissolve it? And, you know, that was an interesting question to look at too. And I know that there's a lot of, you know, open marriages are becoming a lot more acceptable. And, you know, there's more than one way to have a marriage.
That's right.
And so I felt too, well, maybe I can manage this. But once more, the plant medicine was like, what do you want? What do you feel comfortable with?
Yeah.
And it's like, I am a monogamous person.
Yeah. When you know, you know.
When
right?
you know,
Yeah.
you know. And
you
it's
know.
like,
Yeah.
and you know, in the spiritual community, like there seemed to be a trend for a while there, and maybe there still is, or oh, open marriages are great and relationships and this and that. So, you know, sort of identifying as a spiritual person, I'm like, why can't I go along with this? And it's like, no, you need to be your authentic self with this. And if you, and so I through a lot of introspection, I'm like, no, I would like to be, if I'm in a relationship, I know that I just want it to be me and one other person. So my husband at the time and we then just started dissolving our marriage. And, you know, eventually he was comfortable enough to tell people about what he was going through. And so that made it easier for me because I could then tell people and get help myself.
That's right.
Because it was a lot. And also too, making sure that the kids, you know, my kids, they're amazing individuals. You know, they have grown up in a very unconventional household in many ways, and just making sure that, okay, do you feel safe? Do you feel loved? Are you cared for? Things are a bit weird. That's okay.
Well, and something you said, I mean, many things you said, but this one thing about the medicine, and you can't just go from ceremony to ceremony without taking action.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would repeat that 1,000 million times
Yeah.
to people
And
if I could, because, there is that element of
mhm.
the medicine is a way shower.
Yeah.
And it's still your responsibility to take the action
Mhm.
that was shown
Yeah.
to you, whatever is correct for you in that moment, whether it
Yes.
be the ending of a marriage or leaving of a job or, whatever that is, sorting that out. And I feel sometimes that integration and that embodiment of the medicine is what gets missed. And it is crucial. It's a
Crucial.
crucial,
And
crucial,
the
crucial.
interesting thing about the medicine is, you know, the work is done on so many levels. And I know online people talk about purging, throwing up, vomiting all the time, and that's the stuff. But, it's not just physical purging, of course, it's emotional purging, it's spiritual purging. Healing happens on so many levels. And sometimes it's on a very conscious level. So sometimes you're in a ceremony and your head's in your bucket and you're puking something out and you know exactly what you're getting rid of. And a lot of the times it's a relief. You're like, good, I don't need this in my life anymore.
Yeah, great.
But there are times, and I think sometimes that's why ayahuasca can be seen as very, like, it is very intense. And I think sometimes work is done on such a subconscious level that people get rid of stuff. They don't know what it was, and they don't need to.
That's right.
But they get rid of stuff. But it happens on such a deep level that it's like, oh, like, I don't know what that was, and I'm a bit confused. But if you go back into your life, you will see
it. Yeah.
You will see the areas that have changed, and you'll see yourself reacting differently and behaving differently in different ways in your life.
Yeah, it's so
And
individual. I love that you're bringing that into the fold, because often people want to know. We have this obsession with knowing. It's like,
well,
we have to get comfortable with the unknown, because a lot of it is so unknown. If it were known, we'd change it. We'd fix it.
Yeah.
A lot of the times.
It's none of our business either. Like, if you were able to get rid of something that you didn't consciously have to deal with, it, just let it go. You don't need to micromanage it,
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was holding, like, doing the medicine work. And about that time, this was sort of during COVID, but I was going down for months at a time to Peru to work with the maestro, and holding the medicine in integrity in ceremonies means that you also have to hold your lessons in integrity in your life that you've learned from ceremony. So, you can go down and drink as much as you want, but if you're going to hold this medicine in integrity, implementing what you've learned is such a crucial aspect of it. So and really, it's just coming back to your authentic self. You're getting rid of your layers, you're getting rid of your shit that's not you. And so once more, the decision to end the marriage was I had to be in my integrity if I were to continue to work as a medicine woman and apprentice with my maestro.
Yeah, we can continue to do what's easy or what's right. And not saying that staying in a marriage that doesn't have, the love or connection is easy, but there's an element of ease with familiar. That's what I'm speaking to. Yeah.
And but then it was interesting too, because at the time, I was going down to Peru for my own healing. And then the more you go down, okay, well, here, tidy up the ceremony room. Here, why don't you learn an Icaro? And Icaros, for those people who aren't familiar, when you're in a medicine, in an ayahuasca ceremony, Icaros are sung during the ceremony, and they're medicine songs. And in the tradition that I work with, They say that the ayahuasca does 50% and the Icaros do the other 50%. So, I'm going down there and it's like, okay, well, learn some Icaro and help out a bit more. And the maestro that I was working with said, Breanne, if you're going to get serious about this work, you really need to start meditating. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And so me being the Thule jock that I am from my background, I was like, just set a 40-minute timer and then sit there.
And how did that go?
Oh Lord, after like the first couple of times, I'm like, well, this is terrible and not working at all.
That's right.
And so I went online to find some guided meditations, and I stumbled across some meditations of Joe Dispenza.
Yeah.
And they really worked for me. And it's funny, I think still like the athlete part of me really appreciates them because he's very enthusiastic when he's leading his guided meditations. And I even
that's such a good way to put it.
It's
enthusiastic.
I send people sometimes. I'm like, oh, you should try this guided meditation, and then they message you back and they're like, is he yelling? And I'm like, yeah. It's like, is it,
Oh my God, it's
and
hilarious.
So,
yes.
Yeah. And sometimes he's an acquired taste, his guided meditations, but I started using them. I liked them, and so then I started reading his books, and I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And so I made the decision. It was actually about 3 years ago I thought, I'd like to go to one of his events, and because I think that would really elevate my meditation practice.
Yeah.
And so I did, and I always say to people when they go to an event, I'm like, it's not going to be what you think it is. And that's the best way to describe it. And they're magical, first of all. And he basically has this gift of using science to describe mystical experience, to describe healing. And it gives people a permission slip to have mystical experiences and have healing. So the events are these like amazing combinations of like, well, you sit and listen to science and then you meditate for 2 hours, and you can be sitting next to people who are having full-on mystical kundalini experiences, people who by the end of the week are stepping out of wheelchairs, who haven't walked in years. Like, it's no big deal.
Yeah, no big deal.
No
Joe
big
Dispenza,
deal, right?
No big deal.
Yeah. And so my first event that I went to, and it's cool because my first event that I went to was in Cancun. And I just got back from an event in Cancun, and it was a nice comparison because even then, seeing myself from 3 years ago and seeing how much I've changed, and how less I am jerked around by my own mind, and how clearer I am. And I know a lot of it has to do with ayahuasca, and a lot of it has to do with the Joe Dispenza work. And they've been building on one another for me and really helping me quite a bit. And so it was kind of like a beautiful full circle moment. But my first retreat, halfway through the week, he teaches a meditation because, of course, he teaches meditations where people heal themselves. So then the next step is, hey, if I can heal myself, maybe I can heal someone else. And so during the week, he'll teach a meditation where people who volunteered to be healed or who have a physical ailment, they lay down and there's 8 people around them and sending them this beautiful healing energy. And I wasn't the person in the middle, but during my first event, that was when I had the hugest change. So we're doing this healing meditation for someone, and my heart blows open in a way that I've never experienced in my life. I thought I was going to die, but from love. Like, there was so much love. And I had tears running down my face. And it was like that thought where it's like, you know what, if I die, I die. I don't care. Like, this is
this is
it. I had never experienced that much love in my life, and I it was just coming from me, and or like from something inside of me, and it was like, oh wow, I didn't know this was available. And during his retreats, there's always 3 of those healing meditations. And for that first retreat I did, the second healing, there was even more. And the third healing, like once more, I thought I was gonna die from love. Like it was the best experience. Like I have no words. But then at the end of the retreat, I thought I'm like, how am I gonna go back to my life now?
Mm-hmm.
How do I keep my heart open? And so from when I went home, there's some groups that do online healings using his meditation technique. So it was funny because it was sort of like a selfish motivation where I joined one of these groups just so that I could keep my heart open.
Yeah.
And so I made a goal to do 1 healing a day just to keep my heart open. And it's been beautiful, and there's been so many things unfolding from that. And I enjoy going to his retreats that he puts on. And I've had the fortunate I've been fortunate enough to I volunteer sometimes and I help out. And the stories that come from these retreats, I was at a retreat in Denver, and I was helping a lady who I'm a mobility assist sometimes. So I get assigned a person at the beginning of the week and I help them. And she had an incredible transformation. And actually, they got her to do a testimonial. And so if you YouTube, Google stories of transformation, Angelia, she has this incredible story. And I was there during the week firsthand witnessing this. And she went from being in a scooter or a walker, needing an oxygen tank, to like just being completely fine at the end of the week, not needing any medication. And I remember, because I was helping her during a walking meditation, because we do these walking meditations, she was moving energy through her spine, and she looked like one of those, like, those arm waving guys in front of tire stores. Those,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
she's just standing there, and this intense energy is moving through her. And I'm standing behind her, holding my hands out in case to catch her in case she falls over. And I'm like, well, I don't know what's happening right now, but I think she's getting some kind of upgrade. And so it's been incredible watching people's transformation. And I mean, I know that I've changed too. And maybe not so obviously physically.
Yeah.
But I'm at a place of peace right now in a way that I don't think I've experienced since I was about 5 years old. And I know that I've been getting close to arriving there for a while, probably my entire journey. But it really started kicking in July, and in the last couple months, it's been incredible. So
those
yeah.
were such powerful shares. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Joe Dispenza. I've been listening to his meditations, and enthusiastic is a good way to describe them in space,
Right.
I feel like anyone that's done any one of those meditations can attest to that enthusiasm. But yeah, he's a brilliant man and has done some really fantastic things. So I love hearing about your journey. No wonder you keep going back year after year, being in that energy of miracles. On both sides, with the ayahuasca and with the meditation, being able to serve and be of service to all of these folks that are ready for a significant change. Something's got to give, something's got to go, something's got to be brought in, like the love that you felt, the unconditional love. I could feel myself in my heart, getting tender just listening to you share about that. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because, I've been fortunate enough to get like a front row seat to the healing process on so many levels and in so many ways. And, there's things that are similar in both I guess modalities, if you call them modalities, but the two
Yeah.
main ones that, and my maestro in Peru, he always says like healing is a co-creation between the
Mm,
healer and the person to be healed.
that's right.
And it's really like someone is on the edge of letting something go,
Yeah.
and you're just making a really comfortable environment, and
Yeah.
you're making it really attractive for them to let go of whatever they need to let go of, or change whatever they need to change.
Mm,
And the people, myself included, that I see the biggest transformation in, you can tell that they're ready,
yeah.
and you can tell that they've done their work, and they've
Mm,
gotten to a point where they're like, okay, this needs to change, something needs to change.
mm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're ready, you're ready.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that doesn't look like one single thing.
Hmm.
Oftentimes it looks like a series or a sequence of events
Hmm.
that there are always breadcrumbs being
Oh,
left at different phases and different stages of the journey.
hmm.
And I was thinking about this the other day because I deal a lot in relationship wounds and trauma and kind of all that realm of things. And, it stands to speak to, if most of our wounds come from relationships, then most of our healing will be in relationship to one
Hmm.
another. And so that journey of allowing support, you being the catch person,
Yes.
creating this environment to be able to trust another human being again. We don't do any of this shit alone. We don't
No,
do any of it alone.
no, that's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So being able to hold that space in multiple different ways.
In multiple different ways. And then even actually, and then it's funny, it's for myself too. And that was the big thing that came for me this year, was all that external validation, the
Yeah,
things that I've been chasing. It, it's just because I wasn't giving that love to myself,
that's
that
right.
worthiness to myself.
Yeah.
And I said earlier where it's like I was the weird kid, and it's like, I full on I like embrace the weird kid energy now, because it's
Yeah.
I'm really just enjoying being me. And I get a kick out of, I can sit on the couch for hours and just enjoy being me, but like just knowing that whatever happens externally,
Mm-hmm.
like a relationship, a marriage, anything, if it gets taken away, it's okay, because I got my own back too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's been countless people who've helped me on the journey that I'm so grateful for, but it was always just sort of the journey back to myself.
Yeah.
And
Right. Isn't that what
which
it is? You're just like, I
it
reclaimed those
is.
parts that I was a total weirdo about. And now I'm just, wow, I love those pieces of me
Mm-hmm.
that I was embarrassed or shameful
Yep.
about at one point in my life, or someone said something to me and I
Yeah.
internalized it. You spoke to at the beginning, growing up in the 80s. Me
Right.
too.
Yep.
1980 born, just
Yep.
like, doing all the things, people saying whatever the hell that they wanted. Yeah, just a very interesting time to incarnate on the planet.
Totally. Totally. But I mean, like looking back on it, not wanting to change a single thing. And there
Mhm.
were there were parts of my journey that it was like, are you kidding? Like, this is happening now? And it's like, how much more of a dumpster fire can this get? And then of
Yeah.
course it becomes a bigger dumpster fire, and it's like, oh, guess I shouldn't. But if all of that never happened, I never would have arrived to the place that I am
Yeah.
now. So of course I'm going to be so grateful for everything
Yeah.
that happened, because it was just so necessary.
Well, yeah. And I believe that we truly did come here to experience the spectrum
Hmm.
of experience of our own emotions,
Hmm.
of, how ultimately we can reclaim ourselves and come back to loving ourselves and having our own minds blown
Yeah.
To the point that, yeah, not even realizing, like you said, whoa, I'm on a healing journey.
Yeah.
And we never actually get off of that. I think
No.
like the whole of life is a healing journey, from programming, from coming into a world with its conditions where
Mhm.
we want to make everyone and everything look the same, be the same. So stepping out into that role of who's Bree, who's Lisa, who, how am I individual, but yet so wholly connected to everything and everyone else?
And that's just it. And it's like
Yeah.
the weird punchline at the end where it's
Yeah.
like, it's always been you. And it's like, well, then why did I have to go through all this to like figure that out? But it's there's a difference between knowing, or like knowing something and understanding it. And
That's right.
it's interesting, going back to books that I read earlier on, or I
Mm,
go back to the Joseph Campbell, Bill Moyers interview, and I enjoy it every once in a while. But I always remember Joseph Campbell at one point in time, he said, Bill Moyers was asked him, well, what about faith? And Joseph Campbell's like, I don't need faith. I have experience. And I never
mm,
understood that. Like
yeah.
I thought I understood it. And then, once more, my maestro down in Peru, he talks about direct experience. You'll know through direct experience. And once
Mm,
more, I never understood that, and still until I started experiencing the beauty and the love of that experience of being connected to source, of being connected to God, being connected to that oneness. And then all of a
yeah.
sudden I understand now. I on one level I understand I don't need faith, I have experience. But
Mhm.
that's just me right now. Like
Yeah.
I could have another experience tomorrow, 5 years from now, 50 years from now, where that'll completely rearrange that understanding of that experience. But I mean, and then even the thought of, well, the healing journey, and once more it's like, well, what was I healing from?
Yeah.
And what was it? And it's like separation,
Yeah.
illusion.
Illusion. Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I'm not gonna enjoy the crap out of it too. Like this
Yeah.
is a wonderful world. I like popcorn. I love my kids.
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know but there's a different appreciation to it when you do have that connection or that understanding of love, of source, of the divine,
Yeah.
and then having that connection, and then just being like, well, oneness, love, but also I'm going to go look at ducks in the park because that's just awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Because
know
I'm here and nature is cool.
that's just it. And I'd be interested, it would be interesting to even go back and experience life as an athlete, but through the
Hmm.
understanding of this
Through this
lens,
lens. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just wondering how that experience would change now that I have that understanding.
Yeah. And this intrinsic validation that you've
Yeah,
uncovered,
yeah,
right? Would
yeah.
it be purely for enjoyment,
Hmm.
purely for the joy of just being back in a ring again?
Which
Or
would
that's,
almost
yeah,
take me back to like when I started, because
that's
when I
right.
started wrestling, I was terrible at it. Like I think my first year when I was in grade 7, I won one match out of my entire season. And I mean, if you've seen junior high kids wrestle, like everything looks like an accident, like no
Yeah.
one's really doing anything. And sometimes I watch junior high matches and I'm like, how did I not win at least one more match my first year? Because
Hmm.
but at that time it was just so pure for me, like just the
Yeah,
enjoyment of it. So yeah.
totally. Yeah. And can we take the chance at sucking
Yes.
to find that something that
Yeah.
we love?
Yeah.
Because, it's not often that we just step, onto the plate and we're awesome at
No.
everything. I'm sure that happens for certain people,
For
sometimes
some people,
maybe,
but
but practice and getting out there and doing the thing and being brave enough to keep going, even when you're getting your ass kicked,
yep. Yep.
and you spoke to earlier, having the experience of a flow state. Like I've heard, because my partner has been in martial arts since he was 8, right? All different kinds. So jujitsu, karate, all the things. And he's found his love for jujitsu. We were living on Vancouver Island, and he started going to a club, and he was like, holy shit, I just forgot how time does this weird thing when you have to be so present into something.
Yeah.
You're just in it. You have to just be there. If you're gone for a second, match is over.
Yeah.
You know, and you probably experienced that too.
Yeah. But then like being in that flow state, it's like everything, like there are times where I was in wrestling matches and I hit that state and I was like, I could not have done anything more competently in my life than I did at that moment. Like every action was the correct action. Every movement was, it was very much in the moment. And I often wonder, and you know, there are times in medicine ceremonies where I get that for sure.
About to ask, I'm like, do you experience that too?
Yes.
Yeah. Meditation.
Yeah, 100%. And actually, you know, I do feel like wrestling has prepared me for medicine work 100% in so many ways. Flow state's one of them. The ability to trust, the ability to kind of press the override switch and take control of the mind. One of my favorite parts about wrestling was being in a match and hitting that point where your body and your mind's like, you got to stop, because if you don't stop right now, you're going to die.
Yeah.
You're so, and you hit that in basically almost every wrestling match. If you're wrestling anyone close to your skill level, you'll hit that. And I loved hitting that point and kind of being like, well, let's see, you know, your body and your mind are being like, you're going to die. And it's like,
am I?
Well, let's test this out. We're going to find out, because I'm not giving up right now. And I loved testing that and hitting that point, because you know your mind will tell you to stop. You know, it's like a natural evolutionary thing where it's like, oh, you better stop.
It's protecting you. Yeah, trying to protect
you.
And
I find like there's times in medicine ceremonies where that you hit that, where it's like you're coming up against yourself, you're coming up against something in yourself, and really, when you're getting rid of things in yourself that you no longer need, they're like mini deaths.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm getting rid of this emotion, I'm getting rid of this habit, I'm getting rid of this behavior. And there's that part of you where it's like, oh, what am I if I don't have this crappy thing that's holding me back? And
I like it. Give it back.
Like it. But then being brave enough to be like, well, we'll see. And sometimes that's the biggest struggle in the medicine ceremonies is being like, well, I'm gonna have to see who I am without this person.
Right.
And sometimes the desire to hang on to it is very strong. And most of the struggle I see or have experienced has occurred where it's like, but I don't want to let go. And finally it being released and the relief that comes after, but it's being able to step into that unknown. And so I think wrestling in part helped me once more with a lot of those things, but a lot of it was like, well, are you brave enough to do this? Can you convince yourself, your mind, your body, everything is telling you that this isn't a good idea, but can you be brave enough to step into this unknown?
Yeah.
And the rewards are usually huge when you do. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there is that moment when it's, am I going to discover what potential I have here? Or am I going to throw in the towel? And sometimes you throw in the towel, and other times you do that last squat.
Yeah. 100%.
And it's helpful if you have someone else, you know, encouraging that as well.
Totally.
Hand on your back when you're just wanting to throw in that towel. And I think that also leads to more wisdom over time, especially when we don't necessarily know or maybe haven't honored our own capacity, is developing the wisdom to know when to hold them and when to fold them.
Yeah,
when it's worth it
100%.
to push a little bit more, and when it's like, no, actually, this is not the hill I want to die on today.
Yeah. And that kind of goes back to what's your medicine and what's your poison.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
I've been kind of, like I said, playing a lot with that lately.
Mm.
And it's like with, I think it becomes a poison when you start doing it to, I need this to preserve, to do this to preserve this concept I have of myself, or this identity
Mm-hmm.
that other people have of me.
That's right.
So I need to do this to preserve that.
Yeah.
Where I think where I have found it most helpful, like when I'm struggling with that question of, do I hang on
Mm.
and keep trying, or do I let go? The question I find that, most valuable to ask myself is, what is bringing me closer to my authentic self in this moment?
Yeah.
What's the most life supporting thing right now?
Mm.
And depending on where you are and what you're doing, the same action can have two different answers depending on where you are. So it's funny, as humans, we want a definite yes or a different definite no.
Yeah.
And walking the path of healing, or intentional healing, or intentional coming home, it really is like an awareness, and kind of like this questioning constantly of who am I right now?
Yeah.
What am I serving right now? Am I serving a mask right now? Am I serving unauthentic self and an authentic self right now?
Yeah.
And that's going to look different moment to moment.
Yeah. Day to day, year to
David,
year.
yeah.
And sometimes it requires us to go back to the things that are familiar to us
Mm-hmm.
a few times
Yeah.
to really
Yeah.
discover that they're not our medicine anymore.
Yeah, totally. And and
Yeah.
and being, and sometimes even I know when I have struggled with letting something go, I to make it easy on myself, I say, oh, for right now.
For right
I'm not
now.
going to do this for right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that always gives myself permission to come back to it if I need to.
Totally.
And it makes a transition sometimes seem a lot less severe. And
Yeah.
then once the transition's made, it's like, oh, it's way better over here. Why did I wait so long to like let go of this thing or whatever? But like just in that process of letting go, sometimes if I need that little nudge, it's like, for right now. And it's like, oh, I can do that for right now. Right. And then it becomes easier. Yeah.
Yeah, just build the muscle for change.
Mm-hmm.
I often find that it's the small micro steps that we
Mm-hmm.
take each day that ultimately end up creating our lives. It's usually not the like, we all have moments where it's beautiful to have that thing that kind of blows up your world.
Yeah.
But that's not
We've
happening every
we've all
day.
had the desk clearing
That's
moments where it's
right.
like, oh, start over. But I mean, like I said, like the route that my life has taken, I would not have been able to plan out how to get here in a
No.
logical way. It was step by step,
Yeah,
right?
it's like this.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, oh my God, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I'm wondering if you could let folks know how they can find you. Yeah, how they
Yeah,
can
yeah,
just learn more about you.
yeah. My Instagram is Breanne the Graham. So you can find me on Instagram. You can message me on Instagram through there. And you can, my email address is Breanne, Breanne G number two, like the numeric two, at gmail.com. So you can message me through there if there's anyone has any questions. And yeah, and thank you, Lisa, so much for having me and for letting me share some of my story. And I just hope that uh there's people out there who maybe found some wisdom or inspiration,
Mm.
or maybe saw a bit of themselves in kind of what I was doing. So thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome, Bree. I will put all of that contact information in the show notes. And I just also want to thank you for agreeing to come on and share so vulnerably so much of your life. And I know that this episode is going to be helpful for so many folks. So thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your commitment to healing. Thank you for your service. And I hope that you just have the most beautiful rest of your day.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bye for now.
Bye.
As always, thank you so much for listening. Life is busy, so it means even more to me that you are here. Listen, we've got so many great episodes coming up, so please make sure that you follow along on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you are listening. And if you appreciate these episodes, please do us a favor and leave a review and share the show with anyone you think this episode would benefit. See you again next week. Bye for now.